Hello again and welcome back to our course on Project 2019 Advanced. In this section, we're returning to a version of the website project and we're going to look at cost rates and changes in cost rates. I'm sure you're familiar with assigning resources to tasks, and we've already looked at calculations involving cost of resources working on tasks. But sometimes when you assign a resource to a task, there may be the added complication that the rates that you pay for that resource will depend on the particular task that that resource is being assigned to. So let's jump across to the resource sheet. And this is the resource sheet for version 05 of the website project. And if you look at the standard rate, overtime rate, and cost per use columns for the resources, you can see, for example, that for the generic resource Northern Farm Foods, we have a standard rate of $35 per hour and an overtime rate of $35 per hour. I should point out that in this section, we're working on the principle that everything is chargeable. So we're working out a full cost for this version of the project. Even though money won't necessarily change hands in all cases, we need to know the cost of producing this website. So even time attributed to the Northern Farm Foods team, the customer, will still be charged at least on paper. So for each of the resources there, we have, generally speaking, a standard rate and then an overtime rate. In one case in particular, we don't have an overtime rate for, is the contract consultant at the bottom there. But that's because their contract consultant works on a cost per use basis. Now, when you set up these resources, those rates that you enter in columns like standard rate, overtime rate are treated as what are called the A rates. So they're the default rates for those resources. So for example, if I looked at Adam Lacey, right-click and select Information, and then click on the Costs tab, you'll see that Adam's A, or default rate, is $35 an hour standard rate and $50 an hour overtime rate. And the per use cost is $0. In addition to that A rate, Adam can have a B rate, a C rate, D rate, so on and so forth. So let's jump back to the A rate again. In addition, we can schedule changes to any of those rates. Now, I'm going to come back to rate changes a little bit later in this section. So let's stick with the A, or the default for Adam at the moment. I've not made any changes, so I'm just going to cancel that. And I'm going to switch now from Resource Sheet View to Resource Usage View. Now currently, Adam is only assigned to the HTML, etc. task on this project. But if I go down to, say, Bakersfield Associates, which is one of the companies that works for us on these projects, you can see that Bakersfield Associates are assigned to quite a range of different tasks. They've got analysis and design, graphical resources and branding, test scripts and testing. And if I look at the rates for this customer, so again I'm going to right click and select Information and jump across to the Costs tab, I can see that the default rate for Bakersfield Associates is $60 per hour with an overtime rate of $100 per hour. And that is the rate that they would normally charge for IT related work. But when it comes to graphical work, such as graphical resources and branding, they generally charge a higher rate. They're much more specialized skills. So they would charge for that type of work their B rate. Now, when I click on B, you'll see that their B rate is $100 per hour standard rate and $150 per hour overtime rate. Now, what I need to make sure of is that I have the correct rate assigned for each of the tasks that Bakersfield Associates is working on. Now, one way that I can do that is, let's just widen this out slightly. And I'm going to insert a column. So right click, insert column. And I'm going to select, and just going to type this in, cost rate table. And what you'll see is at the moment, everybody, but Bakersfield Associates in particular, have been assigned according to their A rate. Now what I need to do is to change that to their B rate. That particular task, that 60-hour task, I'm going to assign to the B rate. So now that's 60 hours at $100 an hour. So let's put another column in here. And again, right-click, Insert Column. And this time we're going to add the cost column. So now let's take a look at our graphical resources and branding tasks. You can see 60 hours at $100 an hour gives us a cost of $6,000. Whereas the 102 hours at the A rate would give us a cost of $6,120. And if you work that out correctly, it comes out at $60 per hour. So one thing to bear in mind is that when you're setting up and maintaining resource information, if a resource does have different cost rates, you need to maintain the value in those tables. And when it comes to assigning resources, there's no option here to specify the cost rate table to use. So what you would normally do is to assign the resource anyway, and the resource will be assigned with the default A rate. And then if you change the view, so in this case from Gantt to task usage, and let's take an example here. We have Claire Smith assigned to database implementation. If I double click to open up the assignment information, it's in this dialog that you can set the cost rate table. So in this case for Claire Smith, the task is a much more highly specialized technical task, and her time is charged on this at the higher B rate. And I can click on OK. And Claire's time on that task is now being charged at the B rate. Something else that I mentioned earlier on is what we're going to look at next, and that is over the life of the project, and in particular, if you use a particular resource pool on a succession of projects, you may well need to change rates. Normally increase rates perhaps with increase to rates charged by clients, or in fact your own internal charging rates may also change. So let's jump back into resource usage and let's look at Bakersfield Associates again. And let's jump into the costs tab, and you can see the rate there of $60 per hour standard rate, and then the B rate is $100 per hour. Now let's assume that Bakersfield Associates have notified us that from Monday the 29th of April, all of their rates are going up. And in fact, the standard rates are going up by $5 per hour and overtime rates by $10 per hour. So on the B tab here, let's go in and select a date. So we're going to say Monday the 29th of April. The standard rate is going to be $105 per hour, and the overtime rate is going to be $160 per hour. And the cost per use is going to remain at 0. Let's jump back to A, the default. And again, we're going to pick the same date. So we're going to go to April the 29th. And we're going to say that the standard rate is going to be $65 per hour. And the overtime rate is going to be $110 per hour. And again, the cost per use stays the same. Now, each of those 5 rate tables you can schedule rate changes for, and you can schedule up to 25 rate changes. So you can set this up essentially way into the future. So let's click on OK. And of course, the changes you'll see reflected in all of the costs there are associated with the tasks that Bakersfield Associates are working on. And let's take a look at another option for changing rates. We've also been notified that from May the 1st, internal costs will increase by 5%. So that's not a dollar increase, that's a percentage increase. So let's look at Claire Smith's rates and jump across to costs. So what we're going to say is from May the 1st, the standard rate is going to increase by 5%. So all you need to do is type into the standard rate column here, plus 5%. So note here that the current rate is $50 per hour, so a 5% increase will be $52.50 per hour. And I'm going to do the same for the B rate. So again, we're going to select May the 1st, and we're going to say plus 5%. And those will be reflected in the additional costs for any tasks that go beyond May the 1st for Claire Smith. So that's a couple of ways of dealing with cost rate changes. I've mentioned a few times over the sections here overtime rates, and we're going to look at that in the next section. But that's it for now. Please join me in the next section.